what you will learn for today is all about translating direct and inverse variation. This lesson will also serve as your introduction lesson about these different types of variation. So as we start, let's first define what do we mean by variation. So according to an English online dictionary, a variation is defined as a change or difference in condition, amount, or level typically with certain limits. Pero sa math, ang ibig sabihin niyan ay ito. So in math, variation is defined by any change in some quantity due to change in another. So as we go on the different types of the lesson, malalaman yung iba't ibang klase ng variation at kung paano nakakaapekto yung mga types ng variation na to dun sa mga quantities na pag-aaralan natin. So as we start, let's discuss the first type of variation that we'll be studying for today. So, the first type of variation na pag-aaralan natin is what we call direct variation, or sometimes it is also called direct proportion. So, as we read, direct variation is a relationship between two quantities where as one quantity increases, the other quantity also increases. At the same time, as one quantity decreases, the other quantity also decreases. And the ratio between them is constant or same for all given values of the variables. So, mamaya na yung constant for all given values of the variables. Let's focus on this highlighted phrases. As one quantity increases, the other quantity also increases. So, katulad nga diniscuss natin about the variables, this is the discussion about how one quantity affects the other quantity. So, ito yung pinakaunang type ng variable na pag-aaralan natin na kung saan ang pag-apekto ng isang quantity dun sa isa is kapag tumaas yung isa, tataas din yung isa. So let's have this table or let's have this graph just to describe kung ano yung sinasabi ng direct variation. So we have here an example that says height and weight naman. So 'di ba in reality, pag tumatangkad tayo, tumataas din yung timbang natin. Sana all tumatangkad, 'di ba? Anyway, so the graph of a direct relationship or direct variation will look like a line that is pointing to the right. Kasi habang tumataas yung height natin, yan, pataas yan, then yung weight natin tumataas din. That's why your graph will point a straight line pointing to the right. Now, as we continue with some examples of this direct variation, let's have this given example. So, one good example of direct variation is quantity versus cost, wherein it discusses about the number of kilos of rice and the cost. So, isang maganda example to. Bakit? Kasi, pag tumataas yung kilo ng bigas na binibili mo, syempre, yung price or yung cost nito tumataas din. Then, kapag naman bumababa yung kilo ng bigas na binibili mo, mas mababa din yung cost. So, parang direct variation to. Kasi as the kilos of rice increases, the price or the cost also increases. So, ganun din sa kabaligtaran niya. So, that's one good example of direct variation. Next, we also have another example wherein in real life, we discuss about speed and distance. So, the speed of a car and the distance traveled. So, ayan. Now, as the higher speed, mas mataas or mas mabilis yung sasakyan, syempre mas mahaba yung distansya na kaya niyang i-travel or the longer the distance. Now, as the lower speed or mas mabagal yung sasakyan natin, mas mababa yung speed niya, and then mas maigsi rin yung distance na kaya niyang i-travel, di ba? So, this is another good example of a direct variation because as the speed increases, the distance increases as well. Now, as the speed decreases, the distance also decreases. So, that's direct variation. Now, another type of variation that we'll be studying for today is all about the inverse variation. Sometimes it's called inverse proportion as well. So, inverse variation involves a relation of two quantities wherein as one quantity increases, the other quantity decreases. Or vice versa, as one quantity decreases naman, the other quantity increases and that their product remains constant. So, mamaya na ulit yung remains constant or product remains constant. Focus ulit tayo dito sa naka-highlight. So, medyo kakaiba 'to compared dun sa direct variation kasi ito baliktad. As one quantity tumataas, yung isang quantity bumababa. So just to give you an overview, there's an example here that discusses about the price. So and the quantity purchase. So kung titignan mo diyan, habang tumataas daw yung quantity, yung price bumababa. So ano yung magandang example nito? Yung kung nag-aral na kayo sa AP nung law of supply, ay law of tama, yung law of supply. So inverse variation 'yon kasi 'di ba habang dumadami yung supply ng isang product, yung price niya bumababa. One good example could be seasonal fruits. For example, mango. 'Di ba hindi naman palagi maraming mangga sa palengke. So kapag dumami yung mangga, ibig sabihin season nila. Pag dumadami yung mangga sa palengke, bumababa yung presyo. So that's one good example of an inverse variation. Another example of an inverse variation could be the number of workers versus the days that they're working. So, the number of workers and the number of days to finish a certain job. So, bakit siya inverse variation? Siyempre, mas maraming workers na nagtatrabaho, mas maigsi yung oras na magtatrabaho sila or mas maigsi yung oras na tatapusin nila yung trabaho nila. Now, if mas onti naman yung workers, mas mataas or mas marami yung araw na kailangan nilang gugulin para matapos yung trabaho. So, inverse variation. As the number of workers increases, the number of days for them to finish a certain job decreases. Inverse variation. And vice versa will also be the same. Now, another example of inverse variation is speed versus time. The speed of a car and the time traveled. So, speed ulit, pero this time, naka-partner naman siya sa time. Now, pag tumataas or mas mataas yung speed ng sasakyan, mas maiksi yung time na makakarating ka dun sa pupuntahan mo. So, as the speed increases, the time decreases for you to arrive on your destination. Now, on the other hand, yan, as the speed decreases habang bumabagal yung speed mo, mas mahaba naman yung time mo bago ka makarating dun sa destination mo. So, that's one good example of inverse variation.